So I've done video about this before, but I felt like this was a little more in depth and is actually closer to now. Um, there have been new updates, and I've kind of been staying on top of it on this. Again, it really is because it hasn't reached them yet. So welcome to the next deadly AIDS epidemic. The world thought it had fought the HIV virus to a stalemate, but its strategy was flawed. July 25th, 2018. So this is very much closer to where we are now. And yeah, so and you can see a nurse and a patient here. So this is a nurse who takes care of a terminally ill patient with HIV/AIDS in an HIV/AIDS clinic in Kyiv, Ukraine on July 6, 2010. So that's there aren't new cases. Actually, this article will break some of it down. This is the only article that I'm going to talk about this week in Amsterdam for the 22nd National AIDS Conference is a collective. So the 26th optimism that fueled, which they would call the UN Declaration that the end of AIDS was near, has been replaced with annoying experts. So if properly treated, with today's 37 million infected people no longer face mortal illness, as did their counterparts in the pre-treatment days of the 1980s through the 1990s. That much is true. But the rest of the equation is remarkably that the mood in Amsterdam is like surely looms. And so, for years, humanity had the virus on the run and the death toll plunged to a joyously low levels, now poised for the first time in recent memory to add massively to its global death toll of 35 million since 1981. Three factors are contributing to its runaway resurgence: flawed public health strategy, rapidly shifting demography, and the diminished resources. A flawed strategy for HIV control. So let's start with the strategy of 1996. Researchers from multiple institutions and pharmaceutical companies announced that the discovery of drugs taken daily could drive HIV levels down so dramatically so that the treated individual could live normal lives. And more than a decade ago, it was shown that the HIV drugs work so well that viruses were forced into hiding in parts of the body which they couldn't spread to other people sexually through shared needles or blood or utero from mother to child. So recently they had an article in Yahoo, and I'm sure, search engines, where they were saying if you keep the viral load down, if you're HIV positive, you can't spread it to your partner or potential person that you're sexually involved with. They pump this thing out and they hype people up on this thing that if you're infected with HIV and you're taking the medicines that they're giving you now, that you can live longer. You can, if the viral load is really substantially low, that you there's no chance of passing it on to other people. But here's what they're. So I'm going to keep reading. A worldwide strategy for HIV control was set upon aiming to place all HIV positive people on drugs, both to spare their lives and to stop the spread of the virus. So the year of 2030 was set as the world's deadline for halting the spread of HIV and stopping AIDS death. and having the first generation since 1980 born and was completely free of the infection. To make the dream a reality, a cocktail of anti-HIV drugs was manufactured cheaply, bringing the cost down to 1996 high of well over $10,000 per person to less than $75. So that sounds great. A multi-billion-dollar infrastructure was created to find infected individuals and provide them with those drugs and monitor their health. But the strategy was a gamble. So the drugs didn't cure anybody, and they still don't till this day. There is no cure. They have not found a cure. They've found ways to have people live longer, but there is no cure. HIV still lurks in the bodies of nearly 22 million treated individuals. Any interruption in taking the medication allows hidden viruses to flood into the individual's bloodstream, endangering the health survival of the patient and making him or her a contagious risk to others. War, a transport breakdown, government financial glitches, loss of international donor support, patient migration, individual forgetfulness, hundreds of personal, financial, and political factors can interrupt that treatment. Moreover, 15 million people are still untreated and therefore infectious to others. Worse, most of these individuals are unaware that they carry the virus. So there's still people walking around, a total of 15 million or more even, that carry the virus and don't even know that they're infected, and they're spreading it to others. We have the media where they share all this information about if you do end up with it, you can take the PrEP pill to keep other people, you can live longer, and you know, we've got drugs to keep you living longer, and then we can keep the viral load down so that you won't infect others and you can live normal lives. Worst, most of these individuals are unaware that they even carry the virus. So they do not see any reason to get an HIV test, and they're unlikely to take precautions to protect others, such as using condoms during sex. So as a result, the pandemic is continuing to grow. Last year, 940,000 people died of HIV-related causes alone. So while 1.8 million were newly infected with HIV. And new infections are increasingly showing up in forms that are very hard to treat. So this is what happens when people think that everything is safe and that they could do whatever and go back to their normal lives of being unprotected and promiscuous and living risky lives where they can put themselves and others at risk for this. And so now the virus has gotten so adjusted to these cocktail drugs that some of these people who continue to spread the disease, those that don't even know they have it, those who somehow they think that if they, take the drugs, they're going to live longer, they can live promiscuous lives and still not give it to anyone. Well, these drugs are now becoming resistant, because you still have not totally been cured of this virus. And so what this is saying is, as a result, the pandemic is continuing to grow. Last year, 940,000 people died of HIV-related causes. 1.8 million were newly infected with HIV, and the new infections are increasingly showing up in forms that are very, very hard to treat, because the strains of HIV is spreading today more likely to be resistant to those $75 a year treatments. Drug resistant forces the use of more expensive medicines, and the supply chain for second and third line treatments in poorer countries is minimal, in some cases non-existent. So when an individual is infected with a strain of HIV that is already resistant to available drugs, all aspects of the patient's treatment and survival are affected. Between 2014 and 2016, the World Health Organization which is abbreviated as WHO, surveyed new infections in 11 poor countries, finding in 6 of the countries more than 10% were drug resistant. A 63 survey funded by WHO and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation found anywhere from 6 to 11% of new infections involved drugs in form of HIV. And the trend was dire, with resistance increasing as high as 23% annually. Okay? Resistance increasing as high as 23% annually. Once individuals were put on their daily treatments, 2017 failure rates due to the drug resistance were as high as 90% in some countries, meaning new infections in those regions could no longer be controlled by a $75 a year line of therapies. So the first such surveys conducted in Cameroon recently published found that a majority of patients failing their primary treatments, up to 88% of them were infected with resistant strains of HIV, and overall drug resistant rates in the West African nations of 2018 approach 18%. Okay, and so this is pretty bad because people, I guess they think that, they don't have to worry anymore. They're not going to catch anything, and they can kind of live how they want to live and not worry about, spreading it or either getting, sick enough that they will pass away. They figure that they're going to at least live as long as they can until they can no more. But this is showing something totally different than what people anticipated. And so I went and delved into drug resistance AIDS info. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services is where this is coming out of. And this was last reviewed 2018, January 16. So as HIV multiplies in the body, the virus sometimes mutates and changes form and produces variations of itself. Variations of HIV that develop while a person is taking HIV medications can lead to drug-resistant strains of HIV. With drug resistance, HIV medicines that previously controlled a person's HIV are not effective against new drug-resistant HIV. In other words, HIV medicines can't prevent the drug-resistant HIV from multiplying. So drug resistance can cause HIV treatment to fail. For those of you that think everything is safe, think again. A person can initially be infected with drug-resistant HIV or develop drug-resistant HIV after starting HIV medicines. Drug-resistant testing identifies which, if any, HIV medicines won't be effective against a person's HIV. Drug resistance testing results help determine which HIV medicines to include in HIV treatment regimens. So medication adherence, taking HIV medicines every day and exactly as prescribed, reduces the risk of drug resistance. It reduces it, but it doesn't say that it can stop it. It may reduce it. Reducing doesn't mean ending it. What is the HIV drug resistance? So once a person has HIV, the virus begins to multiply and make copies of itself in the body. As HIV multiplies, it sometimes mutates and changes form, produces variations of itself. Variations of HIV that develop while a person is taking HIV medications can lead to a drug-resistant strain of HIV. With drug resistance, HIV medicines that previously controlled the HIV are not effective against new drug-resistant HIV. So in other words, HIV medicines can't prevent drug-resistant HIV from multiplying. So drug resistance can cause HIV treatment to fail. So basically, it's what I've been saying. So how does poor medication adherence increase the risk of drug resistance? Medication adherence means taking HIV medicines every day and exactly as prescribed. So HIV medicines prevent HIV from multiplying. If HIV medicines allows HIV to multiply. So You don't think that some of these people who, you know, happen to have this problem might forget to take their medicine. It happens. Or maybe they think they're so healthy and they've lived so long and they haven't had any problems that they don't have to take the medicine anymore. That could happen too. So skipping HIV medicines allows HIV to multiply, which increases the risk of the virus to mutate, and it will mutate to produce drug-resistant HIV. As a result, the drug resistance, one or more HIV medicines in a person HIV regimen may no longer be effective. There are people out there like that. They forget to take their medicine, or they think because they feel good and they're healthy, they don't have to take it anymore. I had heard some stories out there saying, well, they don't even find it anymore. You don't got it anymore. You don't have to take it anymore. And so this is what we're faced with now. What is cross-resistant? Cross-resistance is when resistance to an HIV medication causes resistance to other medicines in the same HIV drug class. HIV medicines are grouped into drug classes according to how they fight HIV. So as a result of cross-resistance, a person HIV may be resistant even to HIV medicines that a person has never taken. Cross-resistance limits the number of HIV medicines available to include in an HIV regimen. Okay, so I'm not even going to go down and go through the drug-resistant testing, so you can read it at your leisure. How can a person taking HIV medicines reduce the risk of drug resistance? So, of course, for one, you have to be consistent about taking your medicine, and you have to still protect yourself and protect others. But I don't really think people are really on it like that. There may be some people who take things more serious and they're more consistent with their routine, but that isn't everybody. And so that is probably why we're faced with this issue here, where the drugs will eventually no longer work, because you'll have people who have resistant strains of the virus and they will be spreading it. And people will think, oh, I'll just take that old medicine. And they've got the virus that is a little bit more harder to treat, or it is untreatable. The drugs don't help at all. They're affected by the drugs. So basically, it's such a strain that it becomes a deadly virus all over again to treat. And so I just basically read those right there. So here's the thing that bothers me a lot is, okay, so I'm going to read on. See here. Meanwhile, preventing HIV infection has fallen off the priority list in funding. And the individual action, a new UN AIDS Lancet Commission reports on defeating AIDS calls for an all-front urgent increase in prevention efforts worldwide. Rates of sexually transmitted diseases such as STDs, and these are the things that young people now, we're seeing this happen all over again. Syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, herpes, various forms of hepatitis are skyrocketing, especially among young gay males in Europe and in North America, and heterosexual youth. So let's get it out of your head. Let's not get that stereotypical view that it's a gay disease, because it isn't, because it's stating here that heterosexual people can contract it and can pass it on to other people. But now we have a large number of youth, and much in sub-Saharan Africa, often in antibiotic resistant forms. And so a type of essentially incurable gonorrhea, so-called XDR. Have you ever heard that? An incurable gonorrhea. Everybody here in the States, I'm sure most people here in the States, always known these STDs as something where you can take a pill or a shot, have like maybe you're on some kind of week, for a week you're on a treatment, or a day or two and it's gone. or it's treated. And you're supposed to abstain from sex until you don't see any signs of whatever it is. No, we've got something here where it's called incurable gonorrhea. It's called XDR, or extensively drug resistant, and has emerged in Australia and the United Kingdom, prompting alert across the European Union. If sexually active young adults were using condoms, once again, and following the sorts of safe sex guidelines that would protect them from HIV or other STD trends, would not be the new normal. So the demographic challenge. Demographics are also contributing to the resurgence of AIDS. Sub-Saharan Africa population is growing as fast as a rate on Earth, as the fastest rate on Earth, projected to increase to 50% to 1.8 billion people in 2035 and 2.1 billion in mid-century. The total of African population is forecasted 2.5 billion people in 2050. So all this stuff about blacks or the percent of the population or whatever, get that out of your head. That's a lie. So if you include, they're just talking here in the US, but we are not just 13% of the population. I believe that there are much more of us, especially if you add in biracial mixed and people countries, they just happen to be, speak a different language, but they still are in that category. So the World Bank is urging African governments to aggressively promote family planning in hopes to slowing population growth and minimizing the chaos inherent in a child-dominated society. But in 22% of sub-Saharan African population is under 25 years of age. So the 10 societies African with mean ages below 18 years of age. So infertility rates remain over the next 10 years. And there is no reason to believe that they will decline appreciably given current policies. 10 millions of more sexually active teens and young adults will potentially be exposed to HIV during 2020, the year of 2020. So if drug resistance continues to rise at its current alarming pace, the majority of infections by 2025 will defy first-line affordable treatments. So a deeply disturbing possibility presents the emergence of a second AIDS pandemic surging out of Africa's most densely populated cities, riding the wave of the youth-dominated population boom, and built atop an already existent base of tens of millions of currently infected adults. Such a pandemic would dwarf the scale of today's AIDS crisis. So the resource crunch. According to the newly released report, the UN AIDS, the current roughly 19 billion on HIV prevention care and treatment is about half of what funding is needed to reach 2030 HIV eradication goal. So dependency external donors is acute, with the United States responsible for the lion's share of financing. Net funding for HIV efforts flatline. It is inconceivable that countries with minimal tax bases and majorities of population living on less than $3 a day will be able to muster the resources to tackle their epidemics without outside help. So the race is on, pitting the treatments and an adequately funded multi-billion-dollar global health apparatus against rising drug resistance and the imminent tidal wave of African youngsters maturing into sexually active teens in their early 20s. And so the UN Lancet Commission reckons that the minimum of the 36 billion a year will be required to win the race against rising drug resistance and surging youth population. Yet 8 out of 14 donor countries have reduced their support over the last few years, in some cases drastically. And in the US, funding via the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, is expected to decline amid cutbacks in foreign aid and global health by the Trump administration. A dangerous complacency has been fueled in part by exuberance over the use of anti-HIV drugs as equivalent to monitoring after pills taken by sexually active youth in the win of using condoms or avoiding unsafe sexual encounters. 4 million young people around the world, this strategy has spawned a sort of collective shrug about the risk of HIV, which means that people don't think it's as big a threat anymore. And they're more apt to not even look at this as a serious case. So many in the leadership of global HIV efforts blame overly optimistic messaging for high-level complacency and declines in funding. As Chris Spear, the former president of the International AIDS Society, said, "We have done ourselves a disservice by selling to a policymaker or donor audience that we have this problem solved when we haven't." But the two greatest resources needs receive little rhetorical or financial attention: a vaccine and a cure. Okay? So they haven't found a cure yet. So it's all's not over. Just because people feel that they can live longer in medicines, they didn't see this coming. No matter how optimistic the assumptions made in the models forecasting the mid-21st century status of the world's pandemic, it is impossible to imagine global control of the virus continuing to rest primarily on lifelong daily drug treatment for tens of millions of people. If current new infection trends hold, by 2030, another 2 million people will be infected. There are 37 million living with HIV today, dying at a rate of about 1 million a year. Holes, the treatment is radically expanded and will die by 2030. Let me say that again. If the treatment holds, if the trend holds, this trend will feel like we've nailed it and we don't have to worry anymore. The treatment isn't radically expanded. And it isn't radically expanded. There's no funding, and they cut the funding. 12 million will die by the years of 2030. Combine this, could nearly 50 million people will require daily treatment by 2030. And millions of them will be infected by the cheap drugs, meaning the strains will be even more harder to treat and control, which means that's more death. So even that figure may be wildly optimistic, as there is no way to calculate the impact that Africa's demographic change may have on youthful sexual exploration or the other masters that might favor viral transmission. The future seems horribly grim, but over nearly 4 decades since HIV was discovered, the in basic biology, not only has the entire human genome been sequenced, but there are now commercial kits that allow one to decipher a human genome in a matter of hours for less than $1,000. The gene editing technology, which is CRISPR, and other innovations in manipulation of genetic material, make it possible to alter the DNA and RNA of microbes at the single nucleotide level with precision. So the very tools that bacteria used for billions of years to fend off invading viruses similar to HIV are now being refined for medical purposes. And researchers are categorizing the interactions between microbes and resides inside the human body and a highly complex immune system, conjuring almost daily revelations about how the body's own cells and biochemistry can be programmed to fight cancers, heart disease, including plaques, genetic disorders, and yes, infections as well. And so humanity's war with AIDS has reached a dangerous critical juncture, forcing collective reappraisal of strategies used to treat the infection and prevent spread of the virus. This should be a pivot point forward thinking. The scientific mission is funding urgency and directions, bringing fresh vitality and robust energy to the search for the effective immune system response to constantly mutating deadly viruses. So the treatment strategy now in the use from London to Pretoria must be seen as the opportunity to buy the world's time, saving lives until technology that truly vanquishes the HIV threat is discovered and to use. But the sands of time are pouring through a pandemic hourglass. Humanity will have betrayed today's children if they grow up to face the same set of options to protect themselves from infection as 20 day. So it's not over yet. And so it's sad because people think, you know, they nailed it and that, oh, it's that theory, this can't happen to me, or, oh, they got new drugs. And, you know, this is what I generally hear people say. They got new drugs and you can live longer and you can have kids and you can do all this stuff. And, you know, people are like on this. If they have not found the cure for it, it isn't time to relax. So here you can see a couple of articles that related to this one article that I was reading, Lee Trump's new homophobic public health quack. Okay. Proposed U.S. cuts to AIDS funding could cause millions of deaths. And so that is about the cuts from funding this, you know, research that they've been doing and the next AIDS pandemic. Okay, funding cuts, the key U.S. programs that support medicine and treatment are coming. And with a booming African population and trains on the rise, the future is grim. And so I basically believe that I just read that article in full throttle. So it's just sad. I just feel like a lot of people do not take this seriously, that it's okay to kind of take a seat back and not worry about this. Oh, you know, I'm not going to run into somebody like that. You never know. And it says people are pretty relaxed about how their activities are. And judging from the music videos and from the climate of what kind of things are going on and the people that are out there, I don't think people are worried about this at all, not one bit. And so I'm not shocked that it's out of control. And so I just thought I would bring up this issue because I don't think people really understood where I was coming from. Because HIV multiplies in the body, I'm going to repeat this, the virus sometimes mutates. It changes form, produces variations of itself. Variation HIV that develop while a person's taking HIV medicine can lead to drug-resistant strains. So no, it isn't over yet, folks. So I just thought this was something to really consider, and I think people don't realize the severity of it. And so with that being said, I'm going to leave this go. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for listening. People need to take things a little bit more serious because this administration we're in, you know, there's been a lot of cuts, and this program is one of them, one of many. Thanks for listening.